So when you're trying to raise a year's worth of food, especially from your berry and your fruit plants, it's really critical that you get the timing down of when you are doing certain maintenance things to them, from pruning to some type of your disease control, because if you miss that window when it comes to perennials, you've kind of missed it for the year. And if you're really too far off in there, you can weaken the plant so that eventually you end up killing them. And one of the things is, with the variances that we've been having in temperatures here where I live, we've been having predominantly warmer and drier summers the past few years. And what I noticed this year is typically it's usually the end of February, beginning of March, when I actually will come out and need to start pruning and really doing any type of transplanting and moving of the berry bushes. However, with the elderberries this year, it was the end of January and the leaf buds were already, they weren't open, but they were already swelled, which is very, very early for here where we live. So I actually had to prune, and then I moved some of the elderberries. Elderberries spread by runners, like they're pretty shallow rooted. In fact, you can see where I severed some of them and they broke off here when I was transplanting these, but they had shot up some good size. They were coming on 3-year-old shoots. And so I dug those up and I transplanted them, which also needs to be done when your plants are in dormancy. You don't want to do that after they've gotten into dormancy, and you want to do it when they're relatively young and still have a good period of dormancy going so that their roots can develop where you've transplanted them to before the roots then need to put energy into growth. That is what you're going to have in spring and summer. So this one got all the way pruned back. And it's really interesting because, like, I already have, these are newer little leaf shoots because I pruned the large ones back. I mean, and they are like bright green. Like that one's like, it's close to starting to unfurl. So I think here that we may just have a really early spring. We could still get a few surprise colds and maybe a snow here or there. But if these are indicating anything, I think that we're going to end up having a pretty early spring. So I realize that it's very key that I come out and look at all of the fruit trees and bushes and plants. And I can't really rely on when historically here, I should say in years past, the timing that I've used prior, because everything seems to be coming a little bit earlier this year. So usually with our grape plants, the grapes are one of the ones that I can do a little bit later in the spring. They don't leaf out nearly as early. However, if it gets too warm and you prune your grape plants when they have started to come out of dormancy, which these ones are not, these are still very much in dormancy, but if you wait too long, once the liquid is already starting to run in the sap, then when you make your pruning cuts, you'll come out and you'll see where they have like weeped everywhere. And so ideally you want to make sure that you get them pruned before that, because that's a sign that you've really waited too long. So even though it was a little bit early, I don't have a lot of leaf blossoms coming out, but these got pruned much earlier than we normally would have, which on one hand is nice. Like, it's done for the year. It's something I only have to do once a year. But on the other hand, it's like, oh man, I've got to really stay on top of things and pay attention to it, because it's very easy to miss those windows. And I also had what I noticed last year, the past 2 summers, we've had really, really hot weather and it's been very, very dry. And then we also had one of our coldest temperatures on record this winter. So when I came out to prune, I actually had a lot of vines, a lot more dead ones that I had to prune off than I have in previous years. So it'll be interesting to see how our continued kind of wonky weather, which has not been normal for what's been normal here. And these grape plants are, goodness, they're about 15 years old. So this past year, I noticed when I pruned that I probably had the most amount of dead that I've ever had to prune off before. So then over here, we've got the raspberries and the blueberry plants. And the raspberries and the blueberries, I did not get them fertilized this fall, so which is fine. You can definitely do them in the winter or early spring. So I cleaned out the chicken coop and got a bunch of the nesting box aged manures and straw, got those down, got these fertilized, and got all of these guys pruned back. And we added a lot more mulch this year because the mulch really helps. One, it will continue to break down, and that's going to feed the soil along with the aged manure. But secondly, because we've been so dry, the mulch really helps to retain moisture, and raspberries and blueberries both are actually fairly shallow rooted plants. And so their roots are closer to the soil surface. And so when you get really hot and dry, they dry out faster and they also get hotter. So we did a really heavy mulch addition this year in hopes of being able to retain more moisture once we hit summer and also keep their roots a little bit cooler. So there wasn't much like it was about normal with the raspberries as far as pruning and damage. And the interesting thing is on my blueberry plants, we had, even though it was a hot summer, last spring we had a really, really long wet, no, I take that back. It was 2 years ago. 2 springs ago, we had this really long, wet, cool period, and then it switched and it got hot really fast. But with blueberries, if it's too wet in the spring when the blossoms start to open, and in the early part of the year, mummyberry fungus is a fungus that infects your bushes, and the blossoms form into fruit, except about halfway through where they would normally just start to ripen, they end up looking like a shriveled mummy, hence the name mummyberry. And so because we were wet for so much longer than normal, and it's when the daytime temperatures are about 50 to 55 degrees. Did you want to be in the video? Do you want to come cuddle? That is the optimal growing temp for the mummyberry fungus. And so sadly, it was a huge infestation that year. Over half of our crop was lost to mummyberries, which is a lot more than it's ever been before. And so I didn't get hardly any harvest off of the blueberries that year. It was way down. So this year I've been keeping even a further eye on the temperatures, because as soon as you hit those daytimes of 50 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, you want to get a really heavy layer of the mulching on, because you're trying to smother. They're little tiny funguses. Like you can't even always see them with the naked eye. They're very small. Sometimes you can. But if you can smother the spores with about 2 inches of soil, or excuse me, well, you could use soil, but we're using wood chips because you can put those on every year, and it also helps with the moisture issue and weed suppression during the summer months. Then you get those covered up before they have a chance to infect it. So the good news is this year I've got way more bud blossoms than I did last year, because that mummyberry fungus infection that we had, one that was really bad from 2 years ago, then that seemed to really affect how many blossoms that it put on the following year. So it kind of impacted our harvest for 2 years in a row. But there's a ton of blossoms this year, like more than I think there's ever been. So I'm super excited. And I should say, I can tell the way that the buds look, and I have a video on that where you can see step-by-step pruning and how to identify them. But I can tell from the bud formation that there is a ton of blossom buds on here. So I'm super excited. Are you excited too? You excited too? So should have a lot of blueberries. So really exciting, but I needed to make sure I got them pruned, and I got all of our mulch down so that any of those little stinking funguses that come up will be smothered and can't infect my plants. If you want to learn more about how many berry plants and bushes that you would need in order to supply your family based upon your size with fruit for an entire year, then you're going to want to make sure and go and check out that blog post that has all of those charts, and we'll make sure that it's beneath the video listed in the video description for you.